So, Mom, when Dad was interviewing for the job in Omaha, the new building project was already a little bit underway.
Correct.
Okay, so what was that like? When he came in at relatively at the beginning of the project, they must have asked him some things about it.
Well,
when
it was,
he interviewed, and he basically took over that project with members of the board.
he most certainly did, but one of the things that you didn't ask me, which most members of the congregation wouldn't think to ask, the rabbi interviewed the board too. They were being scrutinized as much as he was being scrutinized by them. And if the board didn't pass come muster, he wouldn't take the job. And this was our third interview, with two previous congregations assuming that he would be happy to come. But he refused because he didn't like the way the board treated their past rabbis. So we came here, and the question that was the biggest problem for the board was, how would he handle the fact that they needed more members and more children? The primary goal was kids, the education of children. And of course it was easy for Sidney to give an answer to that because it was his life's goal. He loved teaching. But as he told the board, I can't teach without a chair. I gotta have a seat to put the kids on. And if you haven't got a classroom, I haven't got any seats. And that's when they decided they would add on a couple of more classrooms to the plans. And that's about it. They asked him all kinds of questions. He
And then
asked
the
them all
project
kinds-
became fully underway, and they had to deal with architects and
Correct.
all kinds of fundraising and stuff like that. By the way, I understand that the current building that we're talking about was horribly expensive.
It was $400,000.
Yeah.
Interesting.
By
more-
today's standards, a mere drop in the bucket.
A mere drop in the bucket, but more interesting than the price was the architect. The architect for the new building at, something in Jackson, 30th and Jackson, was named John Latenzer. John Latenzer was an Omaha architect, drew the building plans, and sitting in the congregation today, I do believe, is his great-granddaughter, Allison Latenzer Packman, who was a member of the congregation. Sort of makes things go in a circle, doesn't it?
The whole thing's a circle. You've been through a lot of new building projects and moves and everything like that. So now they're building this thing, and all kinds of decisions have to be made about furniture and colors and stuff like that. And what was that like?
Well, there were two huge problems. Problem number one was, do we have pews or do we have benches or seats in the sanctuary? First of all, they were going to be free. They weren't going to charge for seats. You didn't have to buy your seat to come to services. That went through the board very easily. But the problem with whether you're going to have a pew with no arms or seats for each member was fought back and forth until one member stood up and said, I want a seat on the end of the aisle nearest the wall, not the center aisle, the wall. I want it wide enough for me to sit down comfortably, and I want the one in front of me for my brother to sit down comfortably. And if you do that for me, I'll buy the seats, and if you don't do it for me, I won't buy the seats. Seats got bought, and the Rosenstocks had their chairs, and nobody knew it.
And they were specially sized.
They were specially sized. They were oversized seats, not pews, so you didn't have to sit up against anybody.
Right.
Which was just a huge thing. Everybody who knew about it, of course, laughed themselves silly.
So there was some subterfuge with regard to picking colors and fixtures too, I understand.
Absolutely. I rather assume that that's pretty common. whoever is deciding what colors you want to make a carpet, for instance, the rug, you just bring 3 samples, 2 of which are so awful that nobody would want them in the first place. So obviously they took the one the architect liked best.
Oh, so the architect was actually skewing the choice.
He's skewing the choice with the understanding and cooperation of people like Carolyn Coe, who was a designer in her own right and worked with him. They sort of did what they thought was right and did a very good job.
Yeah. So during construction, I understand that there was obviously a need for a place to have high holidays, so that was...
High holiday services that year was held in the Masonic Temple in downtown Omaha. And it was very uncomfortable, but we were grateful to have it. Left the Masonic Temple for the rest of the year and had services every Friday night and Saturday morning in the JCC at 20th and Dodge.
And everything else too,
And
right?
the offices
offices
were
and-
there, the staff was there, the cleaning people, the janitors, everybody who worked at Temple worked at the JCC that whole year,
So,
including the kids who walked from Central High School across the street.
so basically the project went along pretty
Nobody was disturbed.
smoothly.
Very smoothly.
And then the current building, the Cass Street building, went up, right?
Absolutely.
And life kind of started anew with new programming and stuff like that. So,
Whole new program.
so you kind of spearheaded a lot of that, you and Dad, right? Like talk about some of the new stuff that started happening, maybe the Supper Club and the Ministers Institute and
Well,
things
the
like
Suppers
that.
Club had started before we got there, but we kept it going. Supper Club, I think, was started by David Weiss, who was a predecessor of your dad's. And money was not easy come by in those days. And the Supper Club was an avenue for the congregation to get together for fun. They had a lot of fun, too. They did some wonderful things. They had nobody who was there will ever forget the night we had the Exarban Ball. And we had a queen, and we had a king, and we had princesses, and we had music, and we had the whole works. And the queen walked down the aisle. Who was it? Sally Schlossberg, Bud Schlossberg's mother. The Supper Club was a wonderful institution for inexpensive socialization of members of the congregation. Sally Schlossberg became the Queen of Exarban, and she never forgot it. She loved every minute of it. And her king was the perfectly obvious Jim Farber, who was a young, handsome, good-looking young member of the Temple. And Sally went down waving to all her friends. I could not possibly remember who her princesses were, but nobody will ever forget Sally and her Queen of Exarban. And we had the youth group and got reorganized. We instituted a clergy for
The Ministers Institute.
the instituted clergy for Institute for the Christian Clergy, which became very, very popular. Once a year, every minister in the Omaha and the Environs were invited for a lecture in the morning, lunch, and another lecture in the afternoon by some prominent rabbi, as a rule. And that went even up to the time we left the temple, was still going strong and is to this day. One year we had 400 men and women. It included women at the luncheon, and it became very popular and very good. Adult education was instituted, lots of adult education, in any way, shape, or form. And the religious school grew to the point where we had eventually a director of education.
Which they hadn't had before. That was a new,
Oh no, there
A
was
new
no such
development.
thing.
yeah,
No such thing.
yeah. So there were other things that a lot of people might remember. Being in Omaha, of course, football
Oh my goodness. Saturday morning football was the biggest competition your father ever had. And even the World Series in the fall during the high holidays didn't compare to a football game on a Saturday afternoon. And many a child was kept home from religious school so that they could take him to the football game. Until one of the directors of education, I think it was Merv Lemmerman, who decided he was going to show them that you could do both. You could go to religious school, pick up your kid, and go to the ball game. So how did he do it? He rented a bus, and he got tickets for all the kids in the religious school to go to the football game. They some kind of bleacher seats he had arranged for. So they left the temple after religious school, got on the bus, drove to Lincoln, walked into the football stadium before the first ball was thrown. So nobody could ever tell him you can't do both.
That became a tradition too, that bus.
Yes, because people liked it. It saved parking, and the youth group latched on to it, which you were a part of, so you can tell them.
Yes. Well, yeah. Harlan and I and some other people made bag lunches and made a ton of money for the youth group. And wasn't there some baseball hanky-panky going on during some of the services too?
But that was at the high holidays, so
Yeah.
that was done very quietly. The score is...
Whispered in the ear of the rabbi, was
Right.
it? Yeah, yeah. So then, that was probably what I would call the first big move, and then there was another big move with the tornado.
I hope that somebody will talk about the tornado in detail, because that was a horror to go through. And we managed it. We managed to survive, which was an accomplishment, I think.
But there was some tense moments finding space for the high holidays there, too,
Well,
right?
oh yeah, what did we do then? We went to
Well, Dad
Boys
called
Town.
around to a lot of places before.
We had problems because the temple was quite big by then, and we needed a huge auditorium in which to hold the services. And place A didn't have enough seats, and place B didn't have enough light. You couldn't read the prayer book. It got worse and worse, and one day we got a telephone call from Father Hupp out of Boys Town. And he said, "I hear you're looking for a place to hold services." He says to Sidney, "Rabbi, why am I not included in the list of those who were asked, please give you space?" He says, "We've got an auditorium that will seat over 1,000 people. It's yours." And that's where we held services. We went to the...
And then the whole pews versus seats issue came up again during the remodel.
And they won.
And that's when it became pews, right?
That's when it came pews. And there were all kinds of... Every problem that could possibly come up came up. But there was an opportunity to rebuild, and they did, and they did a good job of it.
So over the years, besides just the physical structure, you've seen an awful lot of long-time staff, I guess you'd say, and personnel come and go,
Absolutely.
which had their own stories.
All kinds. One of the secretaries at Temple, and I think I should toss in the words not Wilma Reeves, came to see me after her work one day. She knocked on the door and walked in, and there is, I can't remember her name, and she started to cry, and I said, "What in the world is the matter?" And she says, "I don't want to work there anymore." She says, "Your husband doesn't love me." And I said, "My husband is not supposed to love you. I think it's time for you to go home." And she walked out the front door, and I went to the telephone, and I called the president, and I said, "That's it. No more." And that's when Wilma came to Temple after that. That was one story about a staff member. The other good staff member story, any of you sitting here in these pews today who have been here long enough remember Sam, our custodian Sam.
I remember Sam.
And we were in Atlantic City on vacation once, and the telephone rang, And on it is Sam, and your father says, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And Sam says, "Nothing's the matter, Rabbi. I'm just calling because I miss you so." So there are funny stories and sad stories, all kinds of stories. But the new temple had corrections. The one on the one on we're in leaving now. One of the things that had to do with the old temple gave them problems. There was no center aisle in the Park Street temple.
Mm.
So when a bride got married, she didn't have a center aisle to walk up and down. And she had to pick which side she wanted to walk up and the other side she wanted to walk down. And who would sit to see what she looked like coming in and what she looked like going. It was a big deal. So one of the main requirements of the Temple Israel on Cass Street was it had to have a center aisle, which it did.
Yes, it did. So it's been a long, kind of circular journey.
I think the thing that's best thing that happened was the board was interviewing the rabbi, but the rabbi was interviewing the board. And the members of the board in those days are names that everybody knows who were members at the time or who have read the history of the temple. And their sons and daughters are now leaders in the temple, which is even better. I'm not going to name names because I'll leave somebody out, but those of you who have been here as long as I've been here, and there are a lot of you, will remember the board's names. Who was there? Milt Livingston, David Beaver, Al Mayer. See, I'm going to forget and I'm going to quit.
Jack Mayer.
Jack Mayer. Jack
Livingston.
And Milt Livingston. I said I was going to quit. That's why I quit. And if you look at the temple board to this day, many of their children and grandchildren are on the board, which
Howard
means
Kaplan.
that Howard Kaplan. We want to know more. Go into temple. Those of you who weren't members at the time, and get a copy of the Centennial book. It's a fascinating read. It really is. You wouldn't believe it, but it is. To which we are grateful to Civi and Susie forever. Anyhow, I thank you for asking us to think out loud. And that's about it.
Thanks, Mom.
Welcome, daughter.
The fact that the rabbi also interviewed the members.
What were the two that he turned down? I think one was Holy Blossom, wasn't it?
I think so, but the other one was Des Moines.
Oh, really?
Really, the president of the Des Moines congregation
You want a refill?
I'm good.
came to us the next morning, and they had an evening meeting. And the next morning, the president came over and he said, "The board has accepted your application. We would like to have you moved to here." And they sat down and had coffee, and in the course of conversation, the president said, "Now there's only one request we make of you. Please keep the retiring rabbi out of the pulpit and away from the congregation. We don't want him to have anything to do with the members or any part, because he's part of the problem with the congregation." Sidney said, "I don't work that way." He wouldn't go. And who did he get holy help from? Julian Morgenstern, who was president of the Hebrew Union College. In those days, he sent the rabbi's students out. And the rabbi in Des Moines was a very close friend of his. And he thought he was doing both of them a favor. And Sidney said, "Dr. Morgenstern, you wouldn't have accepted that pulpit either."
Yeah. I'm glad he didn't go to Des Moines.
Oh, so am I. Yeah,
What was
We never
like
did
the,
talk about the Vietnam thing, but that's okay, isn't it?
I think so. We didn't talk
What
about
was
that,
like
but
the-
I can't do everything.
when the tornado hits that.
1975.
Did a lot of damage to the church?
Completely.
All destroyed.
Almost completely
The whole
leveled
roof,
it.
the whole roof was gone.
Yeah.
The entire roof and
We have
part of the building.
It was almost leveled. She was in, my parents were in the building at the time.
Wow.
With a bunch of teenagers.
That was daytime.
4 o'clock in the afternoon. And when we got out of there, it must have been about 7 or 8. by
It was
the
a
time.
horrible tornado. It went. Omaha's a very physically
Were you
big
there?
city. No,
How-
I didn't live at home in those at 75. But physically, Omaha's a very big city. It's very
Spread.
right.
Lots of land.
Cut across almost the entire city.
Went
and it
down
was-
the
it
main
was
street.
Horrible. And when
Went
I
down 72nd.
it happened in May. I happened to go home for a visit in July, and there you could it still looked like a war zone. And there were streets where one side of the street was completely intact, perfect,
Yeah.
untouched. This side of the street gone,
Wow.
right? So it took how long to rebuild the
A year.
temple? About a year to rebuild.
The temple?
Yeah. I mean, they had a chance to.
And who found the temporary place offer you the temple?
Boys Town.
Boys Town.
Oh, the Boys Towns.
And what did we do with the office? We rented office
There were
space.
rented offices over by
over
72nd, not
70s.
far from where Carol Farber lived.
That's right.
Just in a little office park.
Right
kind
by
of thing.
Exarban.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And football was another big thing in the town.
Still is.
In the
Is
state
it-
of Nebraska, are you kidding? It's a religion.
Yeah.
Football is God. You've never seen anything like it in your life.
And that rabbi that started the tradition to take the kids by bus, is the program is still going on? They have? No?
Not that I know of.
I don't know. I don't think so.
I don't think so. They only did it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Bud
then
Schlossberg used to rent a bus on his own sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes
For his guests
sometimes
and
the
stuff.
people would rent a bus and park at the temple and take the temple bus down to the parking was always a problem. If you had season tickets and were a big enough donor, you got a parking pass. But you had to earn it with good cold cash.
Yeah. I think that
But that was
the,
a big deal to go down there and have a tailgate party.
Oh, I think, and I could be wrong, but I believe that the Nebraska Stadium's bigger than Foxborough.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
How many does Foxborough
I don't know,
hold?
how many does Foxborough have?
I have no idea.
I don't either, but it's huge.
It most certainly is.
So-
They keep adding on seats. They added on more this year.
Yeah.
They put on, the private boxes.